Hi guys, I bought this Delta scroll saw on Craigslist, and although it looked like it was operating fine and then everything was good to go on it, I got it home and found that the blade support here, which is the black piece with the loops, it's broken and the piece is missing. And I'm not really hearing anything from the guy I bought it from, as you might expect. You kind of take a little bit of risk there on Craigslist, but I mean it's a good scroll saw, so I didn't want to completely waste the money that I spent on it. So the next few slides I'm going to explain how I was able to weld a new piece onto the blade support here and get it working just fine again without having to pay somebody to weld the aluminum on it. I used a low temperature welding rod that I got from Harbor Freight for not much money at all. So I'll explain how all that worked. The aluminum welding rods that I got at Harbor Freight, these are the ones that I'm talking about. You can see the item number here. They were kind of expensive, especially considering that I only used up one rod, including all of my tests, in order to fix this broken bracket. But I figured they'll probably come in handy, especially if they worked well enough. So I kind of rolled the dice on it, and I think that they'll come in handy later on down the road for other projects. And the other thing I wanted to add on this was that the particular part that I have was completely discontinued. I looked around, 6, 8, 10 websites. I called 8 different places, and nobody's got this part. So, I mean, it was basically throw the money down the drain or, spend the $15 here and see if this works. I happen to have some aluminum plate laying around in the garage. I've had for years. I hack on it and just, I use it for various things. And it just so happened it was about the same thickness. So I cut out this little chunk here, and this was my first attempt to do it, which failed, and I ended up using just a regular square piece. But this will kind of show you that I just sanded it down on the belt sander, the original piece, so that it was flat, and then I just put the flat edge of my little piece up to it and just kind of fitted it roughly. Alright, so on this one, I apologize for the blurry picture. I must have moved it a little bit. But what you're seeing here is the square piece that I cut, which was my second attempt, which worked out better. It was easier to work with inside the vice grips here. Kind of a precarious little setup on my vice. You got to get it positioned just right so it doesn't move around. On my first attempt, I must have bumped it or something, or pressed too hard with the rod, and it fell apart and made me mad. But on the second attempt here, I got it set up pretty good. I got my torch set up exactly where it needed to be, and this is the one that worked. Now, one thing that I did do on the second one, which seemed to help a lot, was on the square piece that I was adding, I beveled the edge that I was going to weld to the factory piece, and I only beveled the edge on one side and only on the square piece that I was adding. I didn't bevel the factory piece. I think if you put too much of a bevel, then it would be very difficult for me to keep it in position. So I just got it really hot. This is MAP gas, and some people use propane, but I don't like propane that much. I think MAP gas is much more efficient. It tends to heat up things a lot quicker, so that's what I used. And when applying the solder, I just I get it really hot, and then once in a while I'll remove the heat and just kind of brush it with the welding rod across the seam that I want to make, that I want to weld. and after a few minutes it just started to lay down a bead, and I just continued with that bead, and if it cooled off then I heated it up some more. Try not to press too hard on any of the pieces. I mean, you could just lightly drag the welding rod, and when it's ready it'll just start soaking it up. So especially if you have propane, you'd be very patient in doing it with a torch. But MAP gas, just a few minutes, like maybe 4 minutes or so, was good enough in this case. Alright, so this is the finished weld. I'm only going to show this one side. The other side looks pretty much the same way. There's really nothing new to see. But it came out really well. I mean, it looks like a solder. It's basically, if you think of it like a solder more than welding, then I think that you'll be in good shape. You just want to make sure everything's nice and clean, freshly sanded, no dirt or anything like that. Sometimes the tip of the welding rod will start to blob up, and I just cut that off, and you kind of cut it off at an angle. And it explains some of that in the instruction manual for the welding rods. But from here, it's just, clean up and widen out the hole and smooth out the hole until the pin fits. Now, smoothing out the sides, I used my belt sander, because one side I could just kind of drag it along the belt sander, just lay it down on the sander on the outside edge, but on the inside edge I had to use files. So I used a cheap Chinese file that I probably got at Harbor Freight like 10 years ago, and it worked fine. It didn't take, with aluminum, it didn't take more than like maybe 7 minutes, 8 minutes at the most to file it down to where it would fit on the arm. Now granted, I mean, I wasn't getting incredibly accurate with it. I mean, it still doesn't look pretty, even completely repaired in my case, but I don't tend to want to waste a whole lot of time finishing off a part to make it look perfect when it's really just not required. But yeah, if you just have a little file like this, you'll be able to tell when you're filing the parts that are soft aluminum and the parts that are the harder actual weld rod / solder, because it is quite a bit harder and it sounds a little bit different. So you'll be able to also feel the difference of it when you're grinding it with the file. Now this picture is showing me the file that I used. I used a round file for the inside of the loop, and I had two different sizes, so I just kind of had to work it with the small one until I could get the larger one inside the hole. And once I started really getting in there with the large file, after that I was able to move on to a Dremel and a sander to do the final fitting. So here we can see the sander bit that I used on my Dremel. It went really well with this one. I actually tried a little metal carving tool, and the aluminum just completely destroyed that bit. I might be able to get all the aluminum out of the gaps in the teeth for that little tiny carving tool that I have, but probably ruined. So I highly recommend the sanding drums. They're much cheaper than those little grinding bits, and they're not going to load up with the material. I mean, they will, but you just throw them away, so much less expensive. But this worked out really well. Just using the little sanding drum here, I just lightly sanded it, maybe a second or two at a time, and just very frequently tested my pin to make sure that it would slide in. And as soon as it slid in, and I knew I was done. So here's the shot as I was reassembling it. I mean, as soon as I cleaned up both sides a little bit more, sanded it a little bit more. Again, don't want to get too perfect with it. I want to leave as much of the repair material there as possible, just to make sure that it's as strong as it possibly can. So none of my welds or anything interfered with the operation of the machine. So I just left it, including the large square piece. I just rounded it off, smoothed it out so that it wouldn't, cut my finger or something, or the kid's finger, and just smoothed it up and reattached everything. I mean, you could get more involved if you want, but I don't see any reason to. And then the last picture here, it's showing it all back together, and it's running really well. It's running great, so really pleased with this, and I'll definitely be doing more repairs in the future. And now that I think about it, having the ability to cut and attach aluminum in very specific ways is something that I hadn't really considered having around the shop, but I mean, it could come in handy. So definitely worth the money to save the saw, and learned a bunch along the way, and it's definitely going to add some capabilities to the shop. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you need something fixed like this, and this is the only way to do it, it can be done. Just don't freak out, don't get mad, and if it doesn't work the first time, try it again, because it will work.